In Matthew 4:19, Jesus says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Join us in this conversation as we discuss following Jesus, leadership, and doing life with others. Welcome to the 419 Disciple Makers Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of 419 Disciple Makers Podcast. My name is Beth Laurie. I'm your host, and I'm here today with a special friend of mine, Shawn Allen. Hi, Shawn.
How are you doing?
I'm good. We're so glad to have Shawn with us today. I've been asking Shawn for a while. I'm so glad it worked out for him to come and be on our podcast. Some of you guys know Shawn. His family worships at Mount Pisgah. Shawn was born and raised in Missouri. He grew up in a Methodist church there in Warrensburg. He attended Missouri State University, where he majored in socio-political communications and minored in English. From there, he moved to Atlanta in 1997 to attend Emory University School of Law. In 2021, he graduated with his MDiv from Asbury Theological Seminary. Shawn is a member of Mount Pisgah. He teaches classes and serves on the board of trustees. He is a husband, a father, a disciple maker, and a brother in Christ. And so, Shawn, we're just glad to have you come. Shawn is one of those people that I turn to often to ask questions. He is a studier, a learner. He knows God's Word, and he knows where to go to learn more about it as well. And I thought it would be great if Shawn came on today. He's been one of our discipleship group leaders. He's currently teaching lots of other classes for us at the church. But it would be great for him to come and talk to us about study and preparation and, you know, just the things that we think about when we're trying to lead others. So, Shawn, I was thinking about having you on today, but before we jump into the content, would you mind sharing just a little bit about your story? Our listeners love to hear how God's worked in people's lives, so maybe how you became a disciple of Jesus and then a disciple maker.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on here. It's an honor, and I appreciate it, and I'm very appreciative of everything y'all do to promote discipleship in our church. My story, and it leads into kind of what we're going to talk about today, is not very exciting. And that's okay. I grew up in the church. I don't remember a time not going to church, cherub choir, youth group, all that kind of stuff. I, like many people, maybe ventured away a little bit from being active in my faith in college and after that. And then when I married Bess, we started back into it. But, you know, I was trying to think of an analogy. To me, my faith has always been like air. I know it's there. I rely on it to live, but you don't think about it always. And I think that was what made it. Mark Danzy always says, you know, when you're talking to somebody, they can't argue with your story. Well, my story to me wasn't very interesting, because if you've ever had the experience where you get the wind knocked out of you and you have that moment, your brain just goes, oh my gosh, I have to breathe, and you can't. And then you get that first breath of air, and it's the greatest thing in the world. And thankfully, I'm very blessed that I haven't had that getting the wind knocked out of me in my life, like, you know, kind of aspect to my story. And so I always kind of felt that my story was very interesting. You know, if somebody's struggling, if somebody's not sure, and I'm just like, well, I always just went to church. That doesn't really, you know, so when I got to Mount Pisgah and Mark brought me into a group and then asked me to lead. And, you know, that was always one of my things is, am I prepared to lead? And am I prepared to lead? Not just, you know, telling my story, because that, like I said, it's great, but it doesn't necessarily have that moment that people who are struggling or people need to grab onto something have. And so for me, I think a little bit of it was I wanted to be able to help answer questions. I wanted to be able to really also understand my own faith, understand questions I had. When I was growing up, I always hated math teachers who made you show your work, because if you could get the answer, I never thought why does it matter if you see my work if the answer's right? I got to the point in my faith that, you know, I'd have questions, tough questions. Why is this? And you might get an answer, but I never saw the work. And that bothered me. And so that kind of led me to be, if I was going to, I felt I wasn't prepared to be a disciple maker unless I was better prepared to answer some of those questions for myself and for other people. Ultimately, that led me to go to seminary for the last 6 years in order to kind of have that, I think, that confidence and the ability to feel that I was prepared to make disciples of other people. So that's kind of what got me to where I am. And my disciple making, obviously, I think a lot falls through teaching. A lot of that's kind of, I believe, one of my gifts. But I think it's so important, and I love how committed the church is to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's full of good nuggets that you just shared. First of all, I want to encourage you that those people, because I've known many along the way who share the story of they stayed faithful to the Lord. They didn't have, these testimonies of stuff. That's still a beautiful testimony, right? Because it's so encouraging, right? And so this, I appreciate you for that. And we know that God is working in all things. And then I also love your desire to learn and know, and that you wanted to seek out knowledge so that you could be good at pouring into others. But it also, I think, as we're starting to talk about this topic of study, if there's somebody out there that's considering leading and they hear, oh, Shawn had to go to seminary. Do I need to go to seminary?
No,
that creates that question. So do you need to have a seminary degree to be able to pour into others?
100% not. In fact, I don't know. Sometimes it might make it worse. That sounds terrible to say, but part of it is also, during the time I was in seminary, it took up so much of my time. I wasn't being as active of a disciple maker. That was something for me, but it's kind of like, we all learned, if you have children during the pandemic, right? We all became a little bit of a teacher at home. None of us had teaching degrees, but we could still teach our children and help them, hopefully, with what they needed to learn. Or if we couldn't help them, we could try to find the ways to help them. And so this was something I did for me. And I don't think you need it. I do think that, and we'll talk about, a desire to learn is important to be a disciple maker. So what that means and how that manifests itself, for me, it was school. Doesn't have to be, obviously. We have phenomenal discipleship makers, way so far better than me and ahead of me, that never have stepped foot in a classroom for it. So that is, I do think a desire to learn, though, is very important.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the Lord always uses those who are willing to say yes, right? And so much of it is just sharing what you know and learning even together. But I appreciate you taking the pressure off of us, because I know that it does take confidence in the Lord to step out and be willing to pour into others. And it does take that desire to learn and listen to the Holy Spirit. Well, so I wanted you to talk to us about study and preparation and the things that really help us to be good facilitators or leaders. And so why is study important?
So first, I think we have to get rid of the myth of what study is not. Study has a bad reputation. Study is us sitting in a tiny chair, uncomfortable chair in a classroom, memorizing the Peloponnesian War facts, and knowing that was never, ever going to help us in our life. And I think we get so burdened growing up with so much information that is, I don't want to downplay school, but, a lot of stuff that we're not going to need, that we sort of push back when we're free from it. We say, I'm done with this. Thank goodness. It is nothing more than a means of getting better at something you care about. Study to me is practice. So, if you play tennis, you're not just going to show up every couple of weeks for the match and hope you eventually get better. You won't. You're always going to be you're never really, you go out and play during the week. If you have a fantasy football league, and you want to lord it over your friends that you won, you study the stats in the books before your draft, or you shoot free throws if you want to be a basketball player, or whatever it is that you care about, cooking or whatever it may be, you practice it. And the practice is what makes you better. So to me, study is nothing more than practice in something you care about. And we do that all the time with our hobbies. So when you think of it that way, I think it is less daunting. So that's the first thing I want to kind of note what it is. In the terms of what we're talking about, I think it gives a greater depth and breadth to our faith. First of all, the Bible is not always easy. There's a lot of things that we may not fully understand, and we can just sort of read over them and go, yeah, that seems weird, I'm just going to move on. But we may be missing something there. And I'll give an example. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but we were talking about the levirate marriage the other day, which is the idea that when in the Old Testament, when a husband died, then the brother would effectively marry the wife, so that if they didn't have children, and any child would belong to the dead husband. And we see that story in Genesis 19 with Judah and Tamar. You read that story and what happens, and it's kind of weird. And you go, that's kind of a weird story. I'll just ignore that. The thing is, if what you understand about why that existed at the time, it wasn't just for purposes of inheritance. It's also for protecting the widow. And you can find a lot of different things in there. You can find the idea of following God's will, even when you don't want to, which, didn't happen at first in that story. You can see the need to take care of those who would be left outside of society, the widow in that case. There's a lot of depth to a simple story like that on first read just is like, well, that's kind of weird, I'll skip over it. So I do think that it allows you to see deeper into the Bible, which I think strengthens the faith. The final thing is confidence. If you're teaching somebody something, you want to be able to at least feel that if they have questions, that you're in a position to help them. Maybe not know them all, and I think we'll talk about that, but I think that you can help them. And when we look at the Great Commission, it says teaching, right? It's an active verb. It is something. We're not just facilitating, handing papers. We're called to know these things, know the things that Jesus taught, so that we can teach them to others. So, I'm trying to paraphrase here, was 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. And I am poorly paraphrasing that. But I think part of that does involve an understanding beyond just your faith story, but also the why behind it. So probably kind of a long answer, but I think that to me is what study does to really build on our faith and our ability to then show that to somebody else.
Right. Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I really also like that you first started with the idea of studying like you do with a hobby. You do it because there is enjoyment in it. I think of my husband took up fishing during COVID, and he's always like looking up stuff about fishing, trying to learn more about it. And so I can get where just taking that time to know and understand and see the cultural context and being able to speak to that would bring confidence as well as joy in that.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
then if you're the leader and you're preparing, how does preparation in general, and I think you hit on this because you talked about the confidence, but as far as like facilitating the group time, how could preparation help both the leader and the members?
So it's going to kind of come back, I think, to the idea of how to teach something. There's a quote I like to use when I'm teaching a class, and it's from Margaret Mead, who is a cultural anthropologist. And she said, children should be taught how to think, not what to think. And I think that's important if you teach somebody what to think, it's very static. It's very limited. So you can teach your 3-year-old 2 + 2 is 4. Your 3-year-old doesn't now know math. They know 2 + 2 is 4. And so long as that's the only question they're ever asked, they're golden. But beyond that, they really don't know how to apply that into another situation. So I think one of the things we want to teach people is not just here's what it says, but here's what it means and how to think in scenarios that maybe not so clearly addressed. And so, if you're a leader and you're sitting around and, you're in your protective group where you can say whatever you want, and somebody says, I'm thinking about killing somebody. Well, you can pretty clearly say, I got it. There's the exact rule in here in the Bible. I'm pointing at my Bible that says, don't murder. Okay. That's pretty easy. But maybe it's something that's a little bit more of a, I'm struggling. Hey, the economy is really causing me some stress. I don't know if we're in a bubble. I'm having a hard time giving, and I'd really kind of want to hang on to my money. If you just say, well, here's the verse that says to tithe, you're not really addressing the fundamental issue. But if you're prepared and you can think beyond that line and say, you know what, let's talk about, what is it? Is it worry? Well, let's talk about, let's go into discussing the idea of worry and what God says. Is it trust? Is it giving ourselves over to God? Is it, I don't know where this money, I'm just giving money. I don't think about where it goes. Well, let's look at what it does. Then you have your discipleship aspect. Then you have, taking care of the less fortunate, the least of these, and talking about the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. And you can take that issue and maybe instead of just saying, here's one line that says, go do it, you can actually build on it and help them the next time they're ready to give or not ready to give, that at least they're thinking through a broader application than just the rule. And so I think for me, preparation in teaching people, when they run into a situation, maybe a difficulty down the road, maybe you're no longer their leader, maybe they're on their own, that they're not just, if the rule isn't strictly put forth in the Bible about what to do, I don't know what to do. They actually can take the breadth of the information and the overall teaching and the meaning of the Bible and what it does and apply it to any situation. Because we all know there's going to be a lot of situations that aren't specifically addressed. And the ability to then take that and to look to our faith and answer it is, to me, a key to our faith standing up, especially in the face of maybe difficulties or things like that.
Oh, that's really good. It reminds me, and I think this is just part of normal childhood development, right? But at first the kids just get the rules, but then they get to that phase where they ask why. Like, why is that? Why is this? And that's such an integral part of learning, because that's the reasoning. I hear what you're saying. Like, you want to understand what's all behind giving and how does giving contribute not only to the body of Christ, but to my own development. Just a lot of other things that are more than just you should do it, right?
And you find out quickly as a parent that the answer, because I said so, doesn't satisfy them. Right. So the same thing, because the Bible said so, should be, yes, should that be enough? But we may need a little bit more to sort of address the underlying concerns or feelings or whatever it is. And it's there, right? Everything we need for salvation and for that is in the Bible. Nothing, that's the takeaway. But I think that, like you said, with children, at some point you have to be able to give them a little bit more, or eventually they are able to start figuring things out for themselves. And that's when you've really achieved in your teaching, is that you no longer need to tell them. They can start figuring out for themselves, which is obviously the goal of discipleship. You're not walking beside them for the rest of their life, right? You're doing this for a couple of years and you're turning them loose. And not loose. You're always there and the other people are always there, but obviously, they now need to be in a position to not only figure these things out for themselves, but now be in a position, ideally, to lead other people and teach them to do the same. And then it goes on.
Right. No, that's very good. Very helpful. Okay, so you make me think of the scenario, and I think it's going to happen because, as you pointed out earlier, the Bible is complex, but at some point you're going to get to a question that you don't know the answer to, even if you've done great preparation, even if you have studied up on it, but someone's just going to ask a really challenging question. So what do you do as a leader, like to not like what you were just saying, not to be like, I'm the person who has to tell you all this, but to help them?
So, yeah, a couple of things. First and foremost, you're not required to know all the answers. I mean, I wanted to know all the answers. And what I found out was I probably know less now than I did before I started school, because now I have a lot more questions. And that's okay. I think one thing is, first of all, saying I don't know is okay. There are ways to find out. There's good resources. I brought one of my favorites just as an example. So, this is called The Epic of Eden. This is a book that sort of I've given to people, and everybody I've ever given it to loves it. And it sort of puts the Old Testament. It teaches a lot about the cultural context and things like that make the Old Testament more accessible. I have another book similar to this with the New Testament. Everybody I've given it to hates it. I loved it, and so I no longer give it to people. They don't like it. So not every book is good. Going out and just being like, I'll just grab the first book on the shelf or the first one that pops up on Amazon that says it's dealing with this issue may be a bad idea. So I think ask somebody, go to somebody in the church. It may be that the question is difficult and you say, you know what, I'm going to call and see if one of the pastors or somebody at the church will come show up at our next class and talk through that with us. There's a lot of good resources online. It's just a matter of knowing what's good and not knowing what's good. And that's tough. I think the more you spend time and study, you start to learn, hey, here's a resource that's pretty good. This person's a bit of a wackadoo, kind of thing like that. And so I think that there's the ability, and I also think it's good to walk through together, because there's a lot of things that are difficult, and walking through them together. And this kind of one of the things we talked about, and is being flexible in our teaching. I'm a big believer personally in when you're do anything you're doing. I'm a type B. So I'm scatter all over the place, which could be a problem. But, if you're sitting there and you go into your class and you're all prepared, and somebody says, I'm struggling, why God would allow tornadoes to go through the Midwest and kill 60, 80 people, however many people have lost their lives. I'm really struggling why that happens. And you go, it's a good question. At some point, we'll address this. Back to Romans 12. That's, to me, that you're missing an opportunity there. To just say, you know what? Let's talk about it. Maybe we don't have the answer today. The idea of why they're suffering is very difficult. The Bible doesn't. This isn't just a pitch for my class about hard questions. It doesn't really, you get Job. Job doesn't really give an answer. You get James and Paul talking about how to appreciate suffering and what it can do for us. But it does, there's not a lot of answer there. And it may not be something that's easily answered. But put a pause in your class, discuss everyone's feelings on it, do some research, bring somebody in, spend the next 3 weeks talking through a very, very important thing within our faith, and then go back, and take that opportunity right then to address it. And I think flexibility, I think we can be so rigid. And I think one of the things that comes from maybe is people not feeling confident in what they're teaching. And so they sort of feel like they have to stay within the parameters of whatever it is. which is good because the materials are fantastic. But they don't always address an immediate need. And so I always found, for me, when it was like memorizing a verse every week, it was okay. But if that verse doesn't really speak to me, that it's not going to stick with me. Like just memorizing. It's good to know the Bible, but I would much rather say, okay, go find a verse this week that's speaking to a situation that's on your heart right now and memorize that, because that's the one that's going to come back to you. If you worry, memorizing a verse about worry is going to speak to you more than memorizing a verse about prayer if your prayer life is very active. You don't necessarily, does that make sense? You don't need to memorize the verse about prayer. You already have a strong prayer life, but you have a worry problem. Maybe a verse on worry that will run through your head when you start to worry about something would be the comfort that you need. So I think one of the whole ideas to me behind study and all of this is that confidence as a leader to be able to say, okay, I've got my framework of what I'm going to teach, but if we get a little bit off the page here or there, that's okay. I'm good with that. And so that's kind of but and I kind of veered away from your original question about what to do with a hard question. I think there are lots of resources, some of them, to give guidance, but I think just stopping and talking through and dealing with what people are struggling with or questioning as you do it. And, maybe your class goes a little over 3 years, maybe, it bounces around a little bit, but at the end, hopefully what you've done is better address the needs of the people in your class to prepare them to go on. Does that make
Yes, no, that's wonderful. I really appreciate what you're saying, because I can see how the flexibility would be there because of preparation, that you're willing to say, I hear the needs of the people in the group, the questions that they're struggling with, the things they're wrestling with in their own faith, and to stop and address that would not only help them but help the whole group, and it would also model even that the study, because then you could all look it up together and study it and come back and talk about it even the next week. And to your point, you do have a plan, but veering off the plan to be able to meet the needs of the people is exactly part of discipleship, because it's not about just our plan, it's about being able to meet people where they are. I remember that happened to me one time in a group where something to do with forgiveness came up, and I realized that it was a subject we needed to spend some time on. It wasn't a plan, but it was definitely something that a couple people were struggling with. So I like the way you brought flexibility into that, and to just encourage them to not feel like they have to have the answers, but that they can bring that up. So,
and that's especially where saying, I don't know, but let's figure it out is great, because you may not know. I mean, and now the more you do this, the more you will, because once you go through a class and you go through all the resources and you decide to walk through suffering together, the next time suffering's probably going to come up over the course of 3 years with somebody in your class. Now you've done this. Now you're prepared to say, oh, I've got great resources here. I can lead through this kind of, and our journey is not linear, right? And especially when you have 8 people, they're not all on the exact same path going the same.
That's right.
It's herding cats sometimes, and that's okay. You just got to, and I think that to me, the flexibility is key to address a need as it arises.
Well, that's really good. Thank you. I had Kevin Watson on the podcast recently, and he talked a lot about Wesley's questions, and they were deep, reflective questions, and how transformative that is. And so I just wanted to ask you, when we're studying and we're just talking about, the facts of the Bible and the things that it says and how we should live, what about the type of leadership within the group that comes from allowing people to share their struggles or to bring things into the light so that they can receive grace and healing? How does that sort of fit in with all this?
Um, Definitely with the flexibility, I think is key, because as you bring those things up, then we can explore them. Um, Study is obviously complementary. It's not meant to be, this isn't just an effort in academia. Like, that would be boring. It would be, it's an analogous. So, James talking about, faith without works is dead, right? Study without works is dead. But, I think everything complements itself. If you have faith but don't have any understanding of why you have that faith, you just have it, that may last you through difficult situations, or it may not. It may not be as deep as you think, and I hope it is. And that's not a knock on faith. I think the study lets you learn the whole story better, so your faith can be deeper, but it can't stand alone. So, it's like, it's just something that to me adds on and makes it a brighter picture, if you will. But obviously, the most important things are, people speaking through what they're dealing with, and people bringing to light things and talking through overcoming them, and that kind of stuff there's not an academic answer to it. Right. And it goes back, I think, a little bit to the idea that study in and of itself is academic. And I don't necessarily, it can be, but I don't think it always is. I mean, you can read very, deep esoteric writings on things, and that may be what you like. And that may be a little bit more of that academic, but you can also read things that are more grounded. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use, in an application, and it still expands your thing. So I think that obviously, if it turns into a class, which, I do love classes, but I don't think that's the right scenario for a discipleship group. If it's just somebody standing at the blackboard teaching you, and then you go, I think you're missing an opportunity 100%. I think it has to be more about, discipleship groups, more than anything, are about relationship. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, there's nothing more important in a discipleship group that you do other than the relationship among the people. And that can't be taught. That doesn't come from a book. That comes from experiencing one another, sharing with one another, trusting in one another. All of those things that happen outside, the study is just that. Then what we can do is help along the way.
Right. Yes, that's so true. I've seen that just happen over and over again, what you're saying, because the study transforms our mind, and then the sharing and the prayer and the grace and the healing, that transforms our heart and our soul. Like, so they go hand in hand in the whole process of just walking with each other in a discipleship situation.
So, yeah, I've got a 15-year-old right now learning to drive, right? I would never give her a manual on how to drive and then hand her the keys. That wouldn't do any good. That said, if I hand her the keys without teaching her the rules of the road and anything like that, I'm equally negligent as a either way. They have to work together. She has to learn the rules of the road, and then she has to practice it and apply it. Right. And I think you could pick any scenario, and they're true. And so I think that's kind of how I see study, is it goes hand in hand with it, but it can't stand alone.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's helpful. Thank you. Shawn, this has been so good.
Thank you.
It's encouraging to me, study and preparation. As we get ready to close, is there any words of wisdom you would have? Say someone is listening today and they're considering praying about starting a group or starting to invest in others, and they're hearing in their head, I don't know enough about the Bible, or I don't think I know enough to do that. What would you say to someone like that?
First, omniscience is a quality of God, not of man. So we're not expected to know everything. I could say it a little more cavalierly in the old joke about, if a bear's chasing you, I don't have to be faster than a bear. I just have to be faster than my friend, kind of thing like that. But there is a sense of in teaching, I just maybe have to be it's good to be maybe just a little bit ahead of the people I'm teaching, but I don't have to know everything. I think just trust in God. I think that you trust it. First of all, trust in yourself. You know a lot more than you think you do. Mm-hmm. Your experiences in your life are helpful to whatever they may be, whether they are mine, which just, like I said, don't have that big, exciting faith moment, or somebody who does, or anything you've done. You bring a different life experience than those people have, and that is valuable to them. And so the other thing is there is going to be some learning together. I mean, this isn't just discipleship groups, I don't think are a, teacher student. They're not. They're a group with somebody who's kind of has maybe the experience or the willingness to help lead that group, but there's not a hierarchy there.
That's right.
And if you feel that you have to have that, then you're not going to probably feel that you're prepared. But if you recognize what I'm doing is I am going to spend time with other believers, we're going to walk together. All of us are going to grow deeper in our faith. I'm just going to kind of be the one that, at least as we start, that is moving this along and herding the cats, as if you will. I think that you'll realize it's not as daunting. The other thing I'd say is amazing resources. There's a lot of them out there. What y'all have put together, the church, are amazing resources. So when I'm saying hey, you got to be able to go, I'm not in any way taking away from the resources we have are so fantastic, and they're so easy to use that I think it gives you an inherent sense of confidence in, I can do this because I already have that. Mm-hmm. What I was talking about was just, the ability to recognize that no matter how great our resources are, they're never going to address every situation. You can't. I mean, you're not, and so, but yeah, just have confidence in yourself, have confidence in God, have confidence in the Holy Spirit working through you, that you are going to be prepared to do this. And then, step out on faith. That's the other thing. If you I know I struggled with at the beginning, if I would have always continued to always think I needed to know more, I would have died without ever having discipled anybody. And so I think you have to have faith that, I'm going to do it. Hope I'm not going to, if I screw up, there's grace. I'm like that. I'm not going to, I'm not going to ruin anybody. We're going to work together. It's going to be great. And I think most people, once they start doing it and get over that initial thing and start with that group, they realize, like, yeah, I can do this.
That's right. That's so helpful. Shawn, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today. What a blessing. Thank you for being one of our teachers at Mount Pisgah, and into all those who are coming to learn, and for being one of our discipleship leaders. God bless you and all your work. And hey, if this podcast has been encouraging for you today, go ahead and share it with a friend, someone who is considering starting a group, maybe someone in your group who's praying about that. Also, Shawn mentioned the resources on our website. So when you get a chance, go to 419disciplemakers.org, and there's just a wealth of videos, podcasts, documents, all kinds of things that he has mentioned there that could also be just what you're looking for in your study and your preparation. So God bless each of you. Until next time.
For more information, check out our website, 419disciplemakers.org.